Donald Trump doesn't have a historically low approval rating just because there are countless Democrats who already couldn't stand him, or because there's a growing number of independents furious with his tanking of the economy, but also because Republicans, yes, his own MAGA voters, are turning against him as he has turned his back on them and all of the promises he made on the campaign trail. This administration has been incompetent, full of corruption, in a state of constant chaos, and it is that chaos that can be seen in an insane post that Trump made last night that has MAGA outwardly turning against him. Yes, filling the replies saying that this post that we'll check out is the reason they're no longer supporting Donald Trump as it all falls apart around him. We're going to get into it all, but before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way, and it really does mean a lot to me. Now, the reason that MAGA is so upset with Trump isn't just because of what he said, but what it means in the context of the hypocrisy of what he says. And to explain all that, we need some context with this clip right here.
Have you watched any of the Olympics?
I thought that the opening ceremony was a disgrace, actually. I thought it was a disgrace.
The mocking of the Last Supper.
I thought it was
Catholics and Christians across the globe are outraged.
I mean, they can do certain things. I thought it was terrible.
Can you say at the next Olympics, if you're present, there won't be, you'll have enough influence on the organizers that we won't be, insulting Christians?
We won't be having a Last Supper as portrayed the way they portrayed it the other night. I just think, look, I'm for everybody. I'm very open-minded. You understand.
Yeah.
You know me better than most people know me. I'm very open-minded. But I thought what they did was a disgrace.
So you might remember last year during the Olympic opening ceremonies, Donald Trump and the rest of the Republican Party were screaming about how it was an attack on Christians. It was so disrespectful. Nothing could be worse than what happened at the Olympic opening ceremony, which, as you probably remember, you can't remember, because it wasn't a big deal. It was just an Olympic opening ceremony. But Republicans love to play the victim card. They love to get upset. They love to pretend that there's some attack on all these Western values that they claim to care so much about, which couldn't be further from the truth. And Donald Trump, of course, jumped in on that to say he was so offended as a Christian, which Donald Trump is not. And that clearly played out in the post he made. And before we get to it, again, we need to show these Christian values that Trump has that were called out by that brave bishop who spoke against Donald Trump. And she had a lot to say in this interview with Rachel Maddow that I think speaks to exactly why Donald Trump made the post he did.
But I wanted to ask about the broader question of the role of the church right now in moral leadership in this moment. We have seen the Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, elements of the Lutheran Church, other congregations all over the country, very diverse types of churches, offer themselves, for example, as sanctuaries for people who are facing deportation. What do you see as the role of the church in helping lead the public and helping us understand what our moral responsibilities are right now?
Right. That's a great question. I would say the first and primary role that we have is by example. To take the teachings of our faith, to welcome the stranger, to love as we've been loved, to be compassionate, and to live that out in real terms with real people in our communities. So that's foundational. And then, when given the opportunity to speak and to be at times a conscience, at other times a consolation, to be present, ministering or pastoring the common good. And so it takes many forms. It depends on the moment. We're in a particularly harsh moment now when it comes to conversations around immigrant populations in our midst. And so that was the reason for the tone I took now. But it could have been a very different tone in a different context, depending on how compassion needs to be manifest in a given time.
Donald Trump doesn't have any of the values that he claims to. I don't know why MAGA has existed in this cognitive dissonance so long, believing the man selling them Chinese Bibles, the guy with 3 wives, the guy who cheated on his 3 wives, the guy who steals, who lies constantly. This narcissist is some perfect exemplification of Christian values, maybe, the evangelical right. But this is insane. And it only got worse. Donald Trump took it even further when he made a post, as we can see right here, Donald Trump portraying himself as the Pope, this gross joke that he has continued to make lately. And Donald Trump supporters clearly aren't very happy about it because the replies of that post looked a lot like this. If you were as religious as you claim to be, you would know this is incredibly insulting to a huge number of your followers and you wouldn't have posted it. You have no shame. I'm a Catholic, but I'm a Christian and Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. However, I do not think it is a good idea to have President Trump look like the Pope. He is no Pope. He is the President of the USA. This was disrespectful to the Catholic faith. This is nothing to laugh at. You all, whoever did this, really messed up with this one. I'm an evangelical Christian, never been Catholic, but I really wish you hadn't shared this. Your interview suggesting it being Pope was a bit cringy in itself, but this is borderline sacrilegious no matter what your beliefs. Why must you make fuel that the fake news fires? So Donald Trump supporters clearly not too happy with that. And the first one really got me. Whoever made this post, you should be ashamed. Donald Trump made the post. Now, clearly, they were a little bit upset with Donald Trump, but that's so MAGA. Like, if you read between the lines, even when Donald Trump overtly does something bad, they're like, whoever made Mr. Trump do this was horrible. That person should be held accountable. It's like Donald Trump could go out and say something awful, and, their response would be, oh, well, whoever made him say that, they're the problem. Donald Trump would never do anything wrong. But clearly, a lot of upset comments. I didn't want to read through them all because there are just so many. But yeah, what a surprise. Donald Trump doesn't really care or respect faith in any way. He never has. Why would he now? But this isn't the only thing that Donald Trump supporters are turning against him for. Of course, Republicans in Congress are speaking out against Donald Trump's insane tariffs. Some of them are now beginning to get a little bit of courage, speaking out against his backing of Putin. We see Republican governors who aren't getting the FEMA funding that they expected because Donald Trump is diverting it to fund his golf trips. By the way, we spoke about that in a previous video. There are a lot of things that Republicans are getting upset with Donald Trump about, but it's not just elected Republicans. It is conservative judges who Donald Trump appointed, his own judges and judges appointed by Republican presidents who are shooting down his attacks on the Constitution. And that was all broken down right here on MSNBC.
This week, a federal judge struck down Donald Trump's attempt to use the Alien Enemies Act to enact his mass deportations. It's a major blow to his efforts. It remains to be seen if the Trump administration will comply. Also this week, Columbia graduate student Mohsen Madawi was released on bail after being detained under equally dubious national security claims. And let's not forget Trump's beautiful tariffs overnight. One of his biggest sets of tariffs took effect, driving up prices on millions of goods. Michelle Hall, a Trump voter from Snohomish, Washington, tells the New York Times, quote, citizens are suffering. I wanted to have faith. I don't have that faith anymore. What do all these stories have in common? The arbitrary deportation sweeping up toddlers and legal residents alike, the crackdown on college students, the brutal tariffs hammering working families. In every case, Trump is doing these things not through the normal democratic process, but by invoking emergency powers. Not because of any clear and present danger, not because we're being invaded or attacked by college students or by Canada, but because declaring a national emergency or citing imminent national security concerns lets you do something unique in the American political system. It lets you bypass Congress. It sidesteps oversight. It gets you what you want, fast. For those tariffs, Trump claimed a, quote, unusual and extraordinary threat, end quote, from our trade deficit. But that's a complete distortion of the concept. It's normal for a country to run trade deficits with some partners and surpluses with others. It's not an indication of a failing economy. In fact, it's not an indication of anything, really. Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Solow once explained the absurdity of this thinking using his barber as an example. He said, a chronic trade deficit with his barber who doesn't buy a damn thing from me. But of course, that doesn't mean his barber is taking advantage of him. The same logic applies to global trade. We export what we make well or have a surplus of, planes, fuel, agriculture. We import what others can make cheaper, like clothing. That's just how trade works. And Trump's math leaves out services altogether because we are the world's leading exporter of services. We run surpluses in industries like education, in entertainment, in finance. Okay, that's trade. No national emergency there. How about mass deportations? The president reached for a centuries-old wartime law meant for literal invasions by literal enemies of war and used it on asylum-seeking families. It's legally unsound, and this is important. None of this business of ignoring Congress and expanding executive powers started with Trump. Presidents of both parties have pushed the boundaries of executive power. George W. Bush gave us Guantanamo, where men were held for decades with no charges. Can't do that under the law in America. President Barack Obama expanded a drone war that operated in the shadows, often killing civilians outside of any declared battlefield. And let's be honest, when it's our guy in the White House, we often look the other way. Not because we're bad people, but because we trust him. He's on our side. We assume he's doing the right thing for the right reasons, even if that thing neither follows the letter nor the spirit of the law. We assume that power in the hands of someone we voted for will be used responsibly. But here's the danger. Every time we let our guy bend the rules, we make it easier for the next one to break them. Every inch one president takes becomes a mile for the president who comes next. And if that person who comes next is a would-be authoritarian, those powers don't just get stretched, they get weaponized. In Trump's case, the arbitrary emergency decrees mark a dangerous escalation, implementing them not as a last resort, but as a default primary tactic to force through anti-democratic measures. As my next guest who wrote a book on this puts it, quote, Nixon has been the poster child for abuse of power, but it was probably Trump who has been the most willing to ignore established norms of presidential practice. The lesson of history is that presidents of all political persuasions have been aggressive in their use of powers in pursuit of what they consider the national interest. Sometimes that's been for good ends, sometimes not. But if constitutional rules are going to have any meaning, they have to mean the same thing, whether we love or hate a particular president. Whatever powers you give to one group of presidents, say Biden and Obama, you're also giving to another, say Bush and Trump, end quote. What makes Trump different isn't just the abuse of power. It's who he targets. It's fellow allies, Canada, Mexico, Greenland. And increasingly, the targets are domestic. It's college students, journalists, critics, law firms, asylum seekers. The enemies are now us. Just this week, Trump said during a cabinet meeting that he's talking to some of his cabinet secretaries about invoking the Insurrection Act, a move that would allow him to deploy the military on American soil. U.S. law generally prohibits the use of military, federalized military, for domestic law enforcement. But the Insurrection Act creates an exception during, you guessed it, a national emergency.
Donald Trump is suffering loss after loss every single day. And if we continue to put up these public pressure campaigns, we'll see more institutions like Harvard step up and say no to Donald Trump. We'll finally maybe see the corporate media decide it's better to stand with those fighting back against this administration rather than bend the knee to it. That is the agency that we have, and that's what we need to use. And that's why this show is going to be calling out the Trump administration every single day. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you stuck around to the end, you can drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.